All right, I'm Paul Gatza, Director of the Brewers Association. It's time for our annual State of the Craft Brewing Industry presentation. This here, on my left, your right, is Dr. Bart Watson. He is our Chief Economist at the Brewers Association. The foundation for a lot of the information you're going to see today is our beer industry production survey. As well, other people who analyze the industry and provide data. We've pulled in some of their information where it makes sense to help tell the story.
Great. First, I want to start with a thanks. The economic and statistical work that we do at the Brewers Association would be impossible without member contributions. So thanks to the thousands of brewers who took a few minutes to fill out our beer industry production survey, which, as Paul mentioned, forms the backbone of this presentation. All right. Let's start by noting that as the craft industry has matured, diversified, and gotten more complex, it's harder to tell a singular story about craft, just like it's hard to tell a single story about the overall beer market now. Brewery growth continues to accelerate, while production growth, although still growth, is decelerating. Craft continues to grow, whereas the overall beer market is in decline. When we look at competition, craft share is at an all-time high, but at the same time, it's more competitive than ever out there, particularly with competition from the world's largest brewers, not to mention wine and spirits. A reminder before we go forward that all of the statistics used in this presentation use the Brewers Association definition of small, independent, and traditional. Not only do we think this is a market segment that's worth measuring on its own, it's something that's increasingly important to beer drinkers, with the majority telling us they factor small and independent into their purchase decision. Let's move on to the overall numbers. Total beer was down 1% in 2017, whereas the craft market was up 5% by production volume. Another upper-tier beer segment, imports, was also up 3%, and collectively, the upper tier of the beer market is clearly now driving the vast majority of growth. It's worth taking a step back, even though this presentation is about 2017, to 1994, which was the first year that the upper tier of the beer market, craft, imports, premium plus, domestic specialty, first got into double digits at 10% share. Fast forward to last year, and those segments collectively were 40% share. And perhaps more importantly, they were a plurality of the beer market. They're now collectively bigger than the premium and premium light brands that have dominated the US beer market for years. The increasing growth of this segment, the upper tier of beer, means there's been more interest from multinational brewers, more interest from people getting into the industry, looking to make a buck on that growth. And that means craft share of growth in this upper tier has declined in recent years. It also means more brands and more consumer confusion about who owns what and what they should be spending their money on. Finally, it opens questions about how unified the craft brewing industry can be going forward.
All right, so one of the big stories in 2017 was the launch of the Independent Craft Brewer Seal in the end of June. One thing you probably don't know about the seal is it took Bart and me and our events director, Nancy Johnson, all day Saturday to hang that banner on the front of the convention center. That was a bigger job than I thought. In any case, the reason we have launched the seal is to help craft brewers differentiate who is truly small and independent, as well to give a tool for the beer drinker to know when they're shopping who is that small and independent craft brewer. The data shows that it does matter. More than 50% of beer drinkers say that when shown the seal, say that that will help them make a decision when they go to purchase.
All right, looking at the craft market, with growing craft share and declining US beer market, craft once again hit all-time highs in terms of share. In volume share, craft had 12.7% of the US beer market by volume in 2017. That means that more than 1 out of 8 beers was purchased from a small and independent brewer. In terms of retail sales, it also grew to 23.4% of the market, so almost 1 out of 4 dollars went to either directly or indirectly a small and independent brewer. It's worth noting that these share numbers would be much higher were it not for acquisitions, which have pulled a lot of volume out of the craft data set. And so increasingly, a lot of craft growth isn't just forward momentum, but also treading water. Looking at growth over a longer period of time, you can see that we're not seeing the growth rates. We had double-digit growth rates for 6 out of 10 years, and we've now settled into a longer-term growth pattern in the mid-single digits. While it might be disappointing after years of 18% growth, I think this is more realistic as a long-term growth rate, and is something we should all come to expect. We have a bigger base, and so lower percentage rates are more volume. That leads me to say that it does look a little bit better when we look in terms of absolute volume. So 5% growth on our much bigger craft industry was 1.2 million barrels in 2017. That's impressive, but again, if you look at it in historical context, it's certainly down. And I don't think we're ever going to see a year with 3 or 3.5 million barrels added again. This slower growth rate is one reason that we've started to see closings tick up. And I think you can view this stat either as a good stat or in a more positive light. 165 closings, given the size of our industry, is less than 3% of all breweries that operated all or part of 2017. At the same time, it is the highest number that we've seen in the modern craft era. And those in the room should prepare themselves for closing rates and closing numbers that are at this rate, if not higher, in the coming years. Even with a high closing rate, there's still a lot of enthusiasm for opening a brewery, with 997 openings in 2017. By show of hands, how many in the room opened in the last 2 years or are still in planning? All right, decent number of hands up. To those who didn't have their hands up, I know it's easy to get fatigued with the constant pace of brewery openings, but I urge you to welcome those who had their hands up with the same welcoming attitude that you had when you got into craft. New entrants bring new innovation. They bring new ideas, and they bring new energy, and they're going to make the entire industry better. Whether you like new entrants or not, more are coming. At the end of Q1 2018, the Tax and Trade Bureau counted nearly 9,200 active brewers permits in the United States. Over the last 4 years, we've averaged 1,200 new permits every year. So more breweries are coming. More breweries coming online and slower growth means that per brewer growth rate has declined a lot more than the overall growth rate. 6,266 craft breweries operated all or part of 2017. So that blue line you can see is the per brewer grower rate, which has declined even faster than that absolute growth rate given the increasing number of breweries. When we look at growth, you can see that there are patterns in the growth. And this is a new slide that we haven't presented before. Here we've broken into that 1.2 million barrels of growth and broken it down by founded date. Breweries that opened since 2014 had nearly 1 million barrels of growth and grew at 50% last year. In contrast, breweries that opened 2013 or earlier saw less than 300,000 barrels of growth and was only 1%. To the new breweries in the room who are experiencing those 50% growth rates, I urge you to build in realistic expectations for your business. While you're growing fast now, don't expect that you're going to beat the odds when so many older, more experienced breweries were not able to.
Yeah, that's a different picture for some of the older breweries. We'd kind of been before looking at the industry as it's tougher to be bigger, to be a regional craft brewer when all these local players are coming in. And that is true, but there does seem to be an age thing going on right now too. So, if you're a newer brewer, you may not be the new shiny object on the local scene in a few years. So just be cautious is what we're saying there. Now, Bart has shown the letters TTB a few times here on the screen. For some of you newer brewers, please take this the right way, but it means more than just the Tedeschi Trucks Band. TTB is the Tax and Trade Bureau, and we've been seeing more incidences of brewers not really understanding the full regulations there. If you're using unusual ingredients, for example, we've seen some beers come out that are glitter beers this year, or cannabis terpene oil beers. The TTB has a formula process for these non-traditional ingredients, and you have to go through that. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot more scrutiny on your business as well. You're going to bring a lot more attention in the media in a negative context to the whole industry. So please, play by the rules and know the rules. Safety and quality and sustainability are more than just a manual of standard operating procedures. They start with best practices, but then they move to a mindset of always trying to go better, go further, go deeper on the safety and quality. And, really it's one of those things that you can never nail. You can always do more to work on your safety and your quality. Now, a few years ago, when we were at those larger growth rates of 18%, there was, a lot of people who looked at this as an opportunity to, make some quick money and, either sell off or grow a brand and bring in partners. I'd say those opportunities are less than they perhaps were. There still are some opportunities there, but if you're looking for a quick buck, I think you have better chances if you go down to Broadway and open up a honky-tonk than you do in the craft brewing industry right now. And, we heard the messaging from Bob and Eric yesterday that we are stronger together. That is very true. There's different business models. Tap rooms are about half the breweries out there. There's something, brew pubs have their own priorities. Micros, regionals have different priorities. But if we all stick together at the state level, eventually, over a number of years, the state guild will be working on issues that impact everybody. So, be patient, work with your guild, and we can achieve it all together a lot easier than if we try to achieve our own little business model goals ourselves. I want to talk a little bit about what the beer drinker is thinking. The beer drinker is changing. It's not just drinking the beer anymore. It's drinking the beer and then, posting a picture on Instagram or checking in on Untapped or rating the beer on the Beer Advocate. It's, it's not just the beer, but it's that one extra step. And a lot of what the newer beer drinkers, new legal drinking age adults are interested in is what's new, what's rare, what haven't I tried before? They are willing to try a new style just because they haven't had it before. Local and in-state continue to be big drivers. In some states, it's hard to really sell beer if they're coming from somewhere else. And when I think about macro trends that are out there, we've seen local emerge last decade and really take off this decade. We've seen good for the planet be a major purchase driver out there. But now what's beauty is starting to hit those macro trends as something. So, where are the beers that will, help my skin? Where are the beers that have ingredients that are, maybe related to anti-aging? It's happening in all sorts of other products, but we're not really seeing it in beer. Now, we can't make health claims in our marketing and on our labels, but, I think there might be some code words out there, so maybe that's a place of innovation for you. Another thing we're seeing is that there's a mix of a blending of beverage alcohol categories. You see products that have the flavors of beer and wine in the same glass, or beer and spirits in the same glass, that kind of have a flavor profile like these spider plots on the wall behind me. But people are looking to blur the categories and try something different and new, and also control their own experience.
That experience that Paul talked about and that experiential component of the beer drinker is looking for today is something that's found in brewery tasting rooms and brew pubs. Last year, we saw direct at the brewery sales grow to as much as 2.7 million barrels. These are not only places where you get great margins, but they're places for innovation. They're places for brand building. They're places that help build those brands in the market. And perhaps most importantly, they're an ideal environment for building the beverage and beer just the way it was intended. One statistic I like to watch every year is the production to capacity ratio. And now, before I present these numbers, it's worth keeping in mind that this isn't 100% comparable year over year as the craft data set changes. Regional craft breweries come out. We had those 997 openings. But we did see it decline again last year to 0.56, between 0.56 and 0.57. So everyone in the room should be aware that collectively, there's a lot of capacity out there, and that's something you should think about when you're making your future expansion decisions. If we look at this current production capacity ratio and look at that gap that exists, if we grew at 5%, it would take the industry 12 years before we would use up all of the existing capacity that's out there right now. That may be one reason that we saw slower pricing growth last year in average scan data. Looking at IRI, BA Craft, it went up 66 cents last year to 35.35, which was 2%. But that's the slowest growth in pricing we've seen in many years. We are still seeing some opportunities and a lot of growth at the highest end of pricing, suggesting that beer lovers are willing to pay for exceptional products. But given all of the breweries and all of the brands out there, it's harder to differentiate, harder to stand out, and harder to earn those consumer dollars in this competitive marketplace. Looking at growth by category, let's start with brew pubs, who grew 15% last year to more than 1.5 million barrels. In a competitive market, great food plus beer can be a differentiator. And if anything, I think this 15% growth rate undersells how important brew pubs are to many companies, since a lot of regional craft breweries and microbreweries integrate a brew pub into their overall model as a way to use for brand showcase. Moving on to microbreweries, who grew at 17% last year, they're now clearly the growth engine of craft. Collectively, it's amazing to see how the aggregation of small companies has grown into such a big category at 5.7 million barrels. To give you an idea of what 5.7 million barrels means, that's the total beer demand of a state the size of Georgia or Michigan. Hopefully when I do this slide again in a few years, we can talk about Texas or Florida or California. Finally, the regional craft breweries are where we see craft's headwinds most clearly. They grew 1% last year, and it's certainly a challenging environment. These are the breweries, when we looked at that founded age data, they're no longer the new kids on the block, and they're increasingly facing competition from the world's largest brewers who've acquired brands and have the ability to scale those up and push them through their distribution networks. That's not to say that there's not growth out there, and 60% of regional craft breweries did find growth last year through innovation and smart geographic footprints. But it's more challenging, and it's going to be for a number of years.
Exports were up 3.6% last year to a little under 500,000 barrels, which one of the things that I'm seeing is, certainly from the judging of the World Beer Cup, is small and independent brewing cultures are emerging all over the world, and that's great to see, that what started here is now really taking off everywhere.
When we look at style trends, certainly we see the complexities of the market. It's not easy to tell a singular style trend, as it hasn't ever been in craft. I'll start with something that you already know. People really like hoppy beers. So here are 5 hoppy styles that grew the most last year in absolute terms: IPA, Imperial IPA, Session IPA, American Pale Ale, and Fruit IPA. These brands, these 5 styles, were more than a third of craft dollar sales in scan data, but more importantly, they were more than 3/4 of growth. IPA continues to be as much a platform for innovation as it is a singular style, and we're already seeing in 2018 that juicy or hazy IPAs and pale ales are poised to be the next breakout star in this hoppy category. In contrast, we also saw a lot of lighter styles grow in 2017. So these 5 styles, blonde ale, cream ale, Kolsch, wheat ale, and Pilsner, all grew in 2017. And although they were a very small percentage of overall craft dollars, they were 25% of the growth. So we're seeing a quarter of the growth coming from these lighter styles. And I'm a believer that there's a lot of run room here as the craft demographic ages a little bit, and people who love and connect with your brands look for lighter, more sessionable styles to fit into more occasions in their life.
All right, so as we wind this up, I want to talk about 7 concerns that I have about the craft brewing industry right now, and then 7 reasons for optimism. Tariffs, the tariffs, the scene on aluminum and steel tariffs seems to move every couple of weeks, and we continue to engage and communicate with the influencers of what the tariff policy will be here in the United States. Alcohol is clickbait. There was a piece that came out a few weeks ago, as an example, that you go to page 31 of this alcohol and health study, and it says that beer in moderation actually extends age expectancy, life expectancy. Yet the article was titled on the internet that 1 beer a day will kill you faster. And so it got it wrong. But alcohol is sexy on the internet. People like to click on that sort of thing. And so it bothers me. And but there is that thing. It's a delicate balance of alcohol is socially sensitive. It can help in moderation. But when it's not, we could get hit a little bit with some bad PR. Territorial expansion issues. It's really tough to sell beer out of state or even out of market unless you have a person in that market these days. A lot of the wholesalers have, a lot of markets have 1, 2, 3, 4 wholesalers, and some of them have, over 100 different craft brands, and it's hard to get attention and focus in those distribution houses. And what we're hearing from people is, you pretty much have to have someone in a market if you want to grow your consumer pull on a brand, because wholesalers just don't have the capacity to do a lot of the brand building that they were so good at 5 and 10 years ago when it comes to all the brands in the house. Shifting consumer behavior. I'm going to try to bring you all down for a minute here. Brandy Rand from the IWSR has done a lot of research, and what her and her company are looking at is that all alcohol beverage sales in the United States will be in decline within a few years. And that means that the pie could be getting smaller, and if it does, then we're just all going to be fighting for share among that pie. And a few years ago, you'd go to a restaurant and you'd see maybe a mocktail on the menu. Now you go to some of these restaurants and there's a whole built-out section on the menu for zero-proof cocktails. So customers are still getting that cocktail experience, but they're not ordering the alcohol with it. And a phrase I'm seeing more and more often right now is sober curious. Younger drinking age adults, a lot of them are not drinking right now. They have alternatives. I was going to hold up my phone right now, but I left it backstage. Hold up your phone.
I don't have it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a good millennial.
Hold up your phones, everybody. This is competing with alcohol. This is competing with beer right now. The people are, spending a lot of time engaging on their phones and, communicating that way, posting stuff, checking content out, and that is competing. When I was younger, I'd go hang out with some of my friends and have a couple beers in the park, or watch a sporting event and have a couple beers. A lot of those occasions aren't nearly happening as much with the telephone. So that's a little concerning. There's also some research that younger legal drinking age adults are not into hangovers as much as I was. I love hangovers, but no. But it's a fear, and there's actually an avoidance going on. And it's still way early in seeing what cannabis could do impacting beverage alcohol sales. I don't think it's going to be a ton, but it's another option. It's another occasion that may or may not include beverage alcohol. So we could be missing a bit of a generation. It's not going to fall off the table probably, but as more and more trend a certain way, it does impact the numbers. Third space domination. We see more occasions moving to what we call third spaces, stadiums, festivals, music venues, spas, yoga classes, shoe shops, barber shops, all sorts of different places are now making alcohol available. And so especially younger drinkers are thinking differently about where they're getting their alcohol. They're not just thinking, on-premise in the bar or restaurant, or off-premise at home. There's all these third spaces that are growing those occasions. And, I get really discouraged when I go to a stadium and I'm looking around for an independent craft brewed beer. Your lens cap is on. And I can't find one. I see all these, different brands, but they're all owned by maybe one company, and it's feels like, oh, they bought out this stadium. And then I might find a couple craft beers, underneath the right field bleachers, but I have to hunt really hard to find them. And that's, that kind of gets away from the spirit of, a level marketplace. And attempts to limit access. We talk about beer category health and losing share to wine and spirits, but a lot of the limitations that we put on ourselves happen within the people who are invested in the financial success of beverage alcohol. Retailers, wholesalers, some of them do not like that tap rooms are, being so successful right now. They feel like they're taking sales away from those places. And, I think one thing you can do if you're a taproom model is point to some of the local retailers, have a sign in your taproom if you're allowed to in your state that says, enjoy our beer at Julia Herz's Bar and Grill. That's, help send some business over there. People are more likely to buy your beer in the on and off premise outside of your facility after they build that relationship with you in the taproom. One of the ones that drives me crazy is the state legislature in Texas. In their infinite wisdom, they feel like you should be able to go into a distillery. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Nancy Johnson, Texas. You should go into a distillery and you can buy spirits, take home and enjoy it. You go to a winery, you can buy a bottle of wine, take it home and enjoy it. But if you go to a production and brewery in Texas, you can't buy beer to take home and enjoy. How does that make any sense? Beer is the beverage of moderation. We should be encouraging people to, head toward, the lower alcohol products that are consumed in a different manner. So, all right, off my soapbox. Back. Now, 7 reasons for optimism. Tap rooms are awesome. They're great. They're community centers. A lot of them are oriented toward family, so people can get together. They're really fun. You feel like you're part of something larger when you go to a tap room, and that is where we've heard a lot of the growth is, not just for craft brewing, but that is where the excitement is in the beer industry right now. Third space opportunity, I talked about stadiums, but in the other places, you know, the yoga classes that I always go to and the spas, you know, craft is what I'm drinking there. So it's, you know, people tend to buy up a little bit when they're in a place where, you know, they're just having one. Trade practice enforcement. The TTB has some additional funding, they have some additional people, and they've got trade practice investigations underway right now. So hopefully that will root out some of the cheating that's going on in the marketplace and level the playing field a little bit more. Growth in lighter styles, Bart talked about that before. You know, there used to be an industry analyst, an economist named Dr. Robert S. Weinberg, who last century and earlier this century, his theory was that 90% of beer drinkers don't like the taste of beer. Well, it's very different now that beer tastes different. But you know, there are a lot of people who do like lighter beer styles, and the growth of and involvement of craft brewers in this segment, I think, is really good, especially for people who want to support small manufacturing or local manufacturing. State-level capabilities as the years go by. State Brewers Association officers and executive directors and staff are becoming more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, are building more relationships at the state level. So we're getting, you know, to a place of more equal footing at the state level there. So that's a definite reason for optimism, and that's only going to get better and better. And we are businesses loved in our communities. We are, you know, we support the community supports us, and in creating this model, we're sort of putting out a projection of how the world can be a better place. So, you know, I certainly credit you all for making the world a better place. And with that, turn it over to the last slide, back to Bart.
And when we add all that up and put it together, once again, craft beer sales are at an all-time high. Thank you.